Welcome back to the Sober Sex Sofa. My name is Shanti Patty Owen. I am your host for this channel where we discuss sobriety, sex, and mental health.
Grief, suppressed grief, has much to do with addiction issues. I am a sex addict, love addict, an alcoholic, a compulsive gambler, and a debtor.
Well, I was not prepared to start talking about mental health only because it was not on the agenda for a few weeks, but 2 weeks ago, one of my dearest friends of 42 years passed away. And I'm not going to try to think of him too much or I'll start crying. And you will see yesterday when I tried to do the video, I couldn't get through it. But I will, I'm going to post my video from yesterday just so that people can see what the topic of this particular video is: grief and mental health. Grief is not a mental health disorder. Grief is a wonderful healing process for us to avoid mental health issues. It's when we don't grieve, when we don't allow ourselves to feel those deep, intense feelings, and we don't feel grief if we haven't truly opened our heart to someone and truly loved them. So the consequence of loving deeply is deep, intense pain and sorrow. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce myself from yesterday. Very much in pain for several hours. And I also think it's important for people to see that as intense as my grief was yesterday, I'm stable today. And if I don't want to cry, I just cannot talk about him. But yesterday, everything made me cry. And I do feel a lot lighter today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my very vulnerable crying self.
Grief, mental health. It was definitely not my intention to start my mental health segment yet on the Sober Sex Sofa. But the sofa portion, the mental health portion, seems to want to be heard. And the particular facet of mental health that wants to be heard is grief. And grief, suppressed grief, has much to do with addiction issues. And since I have been sober for 12 years, I have learned to embrace grief when it comes knocking. And one of my best friends of 42 years passed away less than 3 weeks ago. And I keep trying to get back to my life as usual, my routines, but grief has its own journey. And as someone who suffers with various aspects of addiction, I know there were many areas in my life that were very traumatic, and I did not want to look at them, and grief was one of those areas. Grief is intense. It has its own agenda. And from what I know about grief, the agenda is to just surrender to it. And it's I don't know if funny is the right word, but I know people have asked me many times, what kind of skin products do you use? What do you do to stay so young? Because I'll be 65 in a few months. And the first time somebody asked me that, my immediate response was, well, I cry a lot. They said, really? But I do think that there is an aspect of that when I feel sorrow, when I feel grief, I let myself have it. I let myself feel it. And like children, children cry, they cry, and then in 2 minutes, they're back to laughing again. I wish that was a little easier, getting back to the laughing part, but I'm not quite there yet. But I have been crying an enormous amount in the last couple of weeks. And I want to encourage you. I know it might not look like fun, but I know when I've gone through periods of my life where I did not allow myself to grieve, it's when my addiction issues skyrocketed. It's when my mental health issues skyrocketed. Grief is not a mental health issue. It is actually very cleansing and very healing. It is the absence of feeling, allowing myself to feel, that has contributed to my addiction issues and my mental health issues. There's so much I want to talk about mental health, but for now, I just want to focus on grief and to let anybody who is grieving know that it is a very loving and healing thing to do. It is often hard for other people to be with us in our grief. And I understand that. When I'm with a friend who's grieving heavily, it's uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. And yet, when I finally surrender to being with them in their grief, I notice how much more loved they feel, how much better they feel, and how much better I feel not avoiding them. Because I often, as much as I understand grief, I've been I want to say a prisoner, a patron of grief. I don't even know what is the right word, but I lost so many of my dearest friends during the AIDS epidemic. And I think I grieved for probably 10 years straight. So I know deep grief very intimately. And I just would love to encourage you all to befriend your grief if you are experiencing that, or if you know someone who is experiencing that. It is very healing for everyone. I'm going to leave it at that for the moment. I want to thank you for being with me in my grief at this moment. And I look forward to seeing you very soon.
So there you have it. It was even hard for me to rewatch that video. I think the more we get comfortable with our intense feelings, the better our mental health state will be. It's because we don't feel right about certain feelings, perhaps intense anger or intense grief, we stuff it, and it comes out in various ways, and addiction is one of them. So, thank you again for being here. I am so excited that you all have returned, and so many of you have subscribed, you've hit the bell notifications, you have liked my videos. I really appreciate it, and I so much look forward to seeing you all again next week, back at the Sober Sex Sofa.